Story time. Gonna tell a quick story, gather around the campfire. Can't believe I've never done this before, never told these stories. I had a question from the tribe and they were asking me what's one of my most memorable patient stories or my most favorite memorable patient. And I have two or three, but I shared this one on Instagram and I wanted to make sure we get it memorialized here on the YouTube channel. This was just several years ago, can't remember how long ago, but I was a nurse practitioner. I also have a memorable patient for when I was a bedside nurse. So was taking care of a patient who was a drug overdose. They came in, got super sick, aspirated. This was a patient who had a legitimate history of drug abuse, overdose, had gone through failed treatment. Mom and Dad were at the bedside the entire time. Got to know Mom and Dad pretty well. This patient got super sick, aspirated, septic shock, pneumonia, ARDS, was prone to pressors. One of the things that was in their favor was this was a very young patient. Took a while to recover and extubated this patient and struck up quite the rapport with them because I had struck up a rapport with the family, the parents. And during those last, that 24 or 48 hours that they got extubated, I visited the room a lot, gave the dad speech, gave the big brother speech, and then gave the stern yet sort of mean nurse practitioner nurse speech, starting out with, "Do you want to die?" We have a very interesting job sometimes as nurses because you get to play the mean, nasty person, but you're doing it with nothing but good intentions. So I was very blunt, very frank, very vocal, and very descriptive on the course that they just went through, how they should be dead, and if they don't straighten up and act right, that death was a guarantee. That they had what we rarely get to see, which is a second chance. And during the last day when they were transferred out of the ICU, they needed to be in the hospital another day or two, and then this person was going to go to some sort of facility for treatment. And I didn't know the details after that. My job had been done. We had resuscitated, and they needed to move on to the next step. And when they were rolling the patient out in the wheelchair, I stopped the wheelchair, I leaned down, reminded them of our conversation, and I said, "You have to promise to come back. I want to see you when you're not sick. I want to see that you fulfill your promise, and I want to see you show us that you're better than this. So I need you to promise me you're going to come back and show us." And they did. They and at the time I was just being me. Didn't think much of it. They promised me with witnesses, and went about our day. Life moved on. Months, years later, I really don't know how much time passed. I was working in one of the other ICUs, and I got a phone call from the HUC, from the secretary, and I think the charge nurse. Got a text. "Hey Sean, you need to come up here. There's someone you need to see, or there's someone here to see you." was a completely random thing, no idea what was going on. And when I showed up onto the floor, there was a small group of nurses in the middle of the unit, and the first person I recognize is the dad. I recognize Dad, and I recognize the dad's face, but I didn't correlate him to my former patient. I recognized Dad immediately. We hugged, shook his hand, and there was a person who was standing next to him. And it was just Dad, not Mom and Dad. Dad was there with the patient, and I looked at the patient who, for those of us that have been doing long enough in the ICU or in other areas of care where they're really sick, they didn't look anything like what I remember seeing. And I quite honestly, I just didn't make the connection, or the sparks, the neurons just weren't connecting. And I kind of looked them dead in the eye, and they looked at me. They lean in, and they lean next to me, and they get close, and the patient says, and every time I tell the story, I have to try not to cry. So the patient leans in and looks me dead in the eye and says, "I kept my promise." The amount of blubbering, crying, and tears and hugging, it just, my heart grew 10 times larger that moment. It was, and it is still, the reason why I go through all of the crap that we go through, and I'm pretty sure it's the reason why all of us do it. It's those small moments, and they're few and far between, but when they happen, they breathe life into your tattered soul. And to this day, I still think about that. And I've had similar instances with other families, other patients who have recovered and come back in the world of trauma, and other patients who have suffered in the medical ICUs. But that one tugged at my heart cords, probably because I spent a lot of time at that patient's bedside, resuscitating that patient with the nursing staff. I'm not alone. It wasn't just me. I'm not taking full credit for it, but I did spend a lot of time with that patient. Got to know that family real well. I was a little bit more invested because I just felt emotionally connected because they were so young, and there was it just bothered me that they were making such horrible decisions. And I took it a step beyond, and I might have stepped outside my bounds a little bit when the way that I talked to that patient during those last days, scolding them, reading them the riot act, because that patient wasn't leaving, and me not feel 100% confident that I had done everything in my power to help change their trajectory. And here I am trying to fight back the tears again. So yeah, as of lately, over the past several years, that has been my most memorable patient.